The summer sun beat down on the desert highway and Route 40 stretched endlessly in both directions like a ribbon of hope through the barren landscape. Sarah Mitchell stood at the gas station with her shirt clutched tightly around her trembling frame and her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 silent prayers. She was 23 but looked older from the life she'd been forced to live. 3 men in leather vests stood behind her and their patches read, Desert Riders MC, and their presence felt like a wall she couldn't climb. The leader was a man named Marcus Webb, and at 57 he'd seen more road than most people see in 3 lifetimes, and his arms were covered in tattoos that told stories of loss and redemption. His club brothers stood watchful and protective as they always did. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke, and the words came out broken like glass scattered on pavement. "Please," she said, "just end it fast." Her hands shook as she started to lift her shirt, and her eyes squeezed shut against the shame and the fear and the horrible certainty of what she thought was coming. Marcus raised his gloved hand gently, and his voice was soft like a father talking to a frightened child. "Easy now," he said. "Nobody's here to hurt you." His club brother Danny moved toward his motorcycle and pulled something from his saddlebag while the third man named Tom stood with his arms crossed watching the road for trouble. Sarah's eyes opened slowly and confusion replaced the terror that had lived there just moments before. "What?" she whispered. Marcus pulled off his leather vest, revealing a faded t-shirt underneath, and he held it out to her with both hands like an offering. "Your shirt's torn," he said simply. "This isn't much, but it'll cover you better than what you've got." Danny returned with a first aid kit and a bottle of water, and his weathered face showed nothing but concern. "You've got some cuts that need tending," Danny said, "if you'll let us help." Sarah stared at these men, and her mind couldn't quite make sense of what was happening, because the world she'd known for the past 2 years had taught her that kindness was a lie and that men only wanted one thing, and that hope was dangerous. But something in Marcus's eyes made her want to believe again. "I don't understand," she said, and her voice cracked with emotion. Tom spoke up from his position by the road, and his voice carried the gentle wisdom of someone who'd learned hard lessons. "We've all got daughters," he said, "or sisters, or someone we love, and we know what evil looks like when we see it." Marcus nodded slowly, and his eyes never left Sarah's face. "Those men who brought you here," he said, "they're not coming back for you, and if they try they'll have to go through us first." The words hung in the air like a promise carved in stone. Sarah's legs gave out and she sank to the hot pavement, and the tears came finally after 2 years of holding them back, and Marcus knelt beside her with his knees protesting the movement but his heart overriding any physical discomfort. "Let it out," he said softly. "You're safe now." Danny brought the water and opened it for her, and Tom made a phone call that Sarah couldn't quite hear, but she caught words like shelter and safe house and immediately. Marcus stayed kneeling beside her, and he didn't try to touch her or comfort her beyond his presence, because he understood that trust had to be earned, especially from someone who'd had it shattered so completely. When Sarah's tears finally slowed, Marcus spoke again, and his voice carried stories of his own. 20 years ago," he said, "my daughter Rebecca ran away from home, and she was about your age, and she fell in with people who promised her everything and gave her nothing but pain." He paused, and Sarah could see the old grief in his eyes. "By the time we found her," he continued, "she'd forgotten what kindness looked like, and she fought us every step of the way back to herself." "Is she okay now?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "She's a social worker," he said, "helps kids who remind her of who she used to be, and she's got 2 beautiful children of her own and a husband who treats her like the precious gift she is." Danny added his own story while he cleaned the cuts on Sarah's arms with gentle efficiency. "My sister wasn't so lucky," he said. "We lost her to the streets when I was 25, and I spent the next 30 years wondering if I could have done something different." He looked at Sarah directly, and his eyes were clear and honest. "That's why when we see someone who needs help," he said, "we don't drive past, and we don't look away, and we don't make assumptions about what they deserve or don't deserve." Tom finished his phone call and walked over to join them. "There's a place about 40 miles up the road," he said. "It's run by a woman named Catherine Rodriguez, and she's helped hundreds of girls get back on their feet, and they've got a bed waiting for you, and counselors and job training and whatever else you need." Sarah looked at these 3 men, and something inside her chest that had been locked tight for 2 years began to crack open. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Marcus stood slowly and offered his hand to help her up, and this time she took it. Because somebody has to, he said simply, and because you matter and because the world's got enough darkness without good people standing by and watching it spread. They gave her a clean shirt and some food from their saddlebags, and Tom's wife had packed homemade cookies that morning, and somehow that small detail made Sarah cry again because it spoke of normal life and kitchen tables and love baked into simple gestures. Danny called ahead to the shelter and spoke with Catherine personally, and he gave her all the details while Marcus and Tom kept watch to make sure the men who'd abandoned Sarah didn't change their minds. "They're going to come looking for me," Sarah said quietly. "They always do." Marcus shook his head and his voice carried absolute certainty. "Let them try," he said. "The Desert Riders have connections in every county in this state, and if they show their faces anywhere near you they'll regret it for whatever time they have left." It wasn't a threat exactly, but rather a statement of fact delivered by men who'd spent decades protecting the vulnerable and standing against the darkness. When it was time to go, Tom offered to ride escort behind the shelter's van that was coming to pick Sarah up, and Danny gave her his phone number written on a piece of paper torn from a small notebook. "You call if you need anything," he said, "day or night, and it doesn't matter if it's 6 months or 6 years from now, and if you just need to hear a friendly voice, you call." Sarah clutched the paper like it was a lifeline. Marcus walked with her to the edge of the gas station parking lot, and they stood in the shade of the building watching the heat waves shimmer on the distant highway. "I used to think I deserved what happened to me," Sarah said softly, "like maybe I made too many bad choices and this was just what I had coming." Marcus turned to look at her and his eyes were fierce with conviction. "Nobody deserves to be treated like property," he said. "Nobody deserves to live in fear, and nobody deserves to have their humanity stripped away, and I don't care what choices you made because we've all made bad ones, and the difference between people who get second chances and people who don't usually comes down to luck and circumstance. More than any kind of moral superiority." He paused and his voice softened. "You're getting a second chance now," he said, "and what you do with it is up to you, but know that there are people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself." The shelter van arrived 20 minutes later, and Catherine Rodriguez stepped out with open arms and a warm smile, and she had the kind of face that had seen everything and judged nothing. "Welcome, Sarah," she said. "We've been waiting for you." Sarah turned back to the 3 bikers who stood by their motorcycles, and she tried to find words big enough to hold her gratitude, but nothing seemed adequate. "Thank you," she finally said, and her voice was stronger now. "Thank you for seeing me as human." Marcus nodded and Danny waved and Tom gave her a thumbs up. As the van pulled away, Sarah watched through the rear window as the 3 men stood in formation, and they stayed there until the van was out of sight, making sure she was truly safe. Inside the van, Catherine handed her a blanket, even though it was summer, because sometimes people need the comfort more than the warmth. "Those men saved my life," Sarah said. Catherine smiled knowingly. "They've saved a lot of lives," she said. "The Desert Riders have been working with our shelter for over a decade, and they keep an eye out on the highways for people who need help, and they never ask for recognition or thanks, and they just do what's right because it's right." Sarah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and for the first time in 2 years she felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. It wasn't a grand feeling or a dramatic moment, but rather a quiet understanding that maybe the world wasn't entirely dark, and maybe there were still people who chose kindness over cruelty, and maybe she deserved a chance to heal and grow and become whoever she was meant to be. Behind them on the highway, Marcus and Danny and Tom climbed back on their motorcycles, and the rumble of their engines was like thunder rolling across the desert. They had a long ride ahead of them, but first they stopped at a diner they knew and ordered coffee and pie, and they sat in their usual booth by the window. "Think she'll make it?" Danny asked. Marcus stirred sugar into his coffee and considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she's got a fighting chance," he said, "and sometimes that's all anybody needs." Tom raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. "To second chances," he said. "To second chances," Marcus and Danny echoed. And somewhere down the highway, Sarah Mitchell began the long journey back to herself, surrounded by people who believed that every life has value and that kindness isn't weakness but rather the strongest force in the universe. The end.